Hey, George, have you ever murdered anybody?
I can't say I have, Joe.
Are you sure?
I think I would remember.
Even when you were in the Navy?
The fuck do you think happens in the Navy?
According to the village people, you sail the 7 seas and learn science technology, but I figured they left something out.
No, I never murdered anybody in the Navy, and just so you know, I've never murdered anybody in a house. I've never murdered anybody with a mouse. I do not murder here nor there. I do not murder anywhere.
What was that, Dr. Seuss?
Yeah, so what about you?
Okay, now, have no fear, said the cat. My tricks are not bad, said the cat in the hat.
Not Dr. Seuss. Did you ever murder anybody?
That's an awfully personal question.
But you just asked that.
Yeah, but I ask all sorts of weird shit. You should know better than to follow my lead.
I noticed you didn't say no.
Of course I didn't murder anybody, although I did once plan to murder my father.
What are you talking about? You never met your father.
I didn't say it was a good plan. Welcome to Does This Still Work? The podcast looks at old movies and asks, does it still work? I'm Joe Dixon.
And I'm George Romeka, and today we are discussing Manhattan Murder Mystery from 1993 and some historical context. First, podcasty stuff. You can reach us at ttswpod@gmail.com, on Facebook, Letterboxd, and our YouTube channel. Joe is on Blue Sky at joedixon.bsky.social. Please tell your friends about us, even the ones who own theaters.
And are planning to murder their wives.
Yeah, which are a dime a dozen according to this movie. And leave 5-star ratings everywhere. You can pick what we watch and get extra per episode content by funding us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/dtswpod. Now, Joe, take us back to the year I graduated elementary school, 1993.
1993. I was 26 and you were 12, and neither of us knew it at the time, but the World Trade Center would be attacked by terrorists for what would turn out to be not the last time. George, read this headline from the New York Times.
Explosion at the Twin Towers. The overview. Blast hits Trade Center. Bomb suspected. 5 killed. Thousands flee smoke in towers.
It would turn out to be 6 who were killed, not 5. A truck parked in the garage with a 1,200-pound bomb inside was the cause for the blast. It created a 100-foot crater and collapsed the ceiling of the PATH train. So it's a miracle more people weren't murdered. In fact, I suspect because the number of those who died was so low, folks quickly moved on. I mean, think about it. The assault happened in February. Some of the men who did it would be captured and put on trial in October of that same year, and it barely generated any news.
But Joe, I thought that we had a short attention span nowadays.
No, it's always been bad.
Oh.
We had wall-to-wall coverage of this thing on the day it happened, but 9 months later, nobody cared. We as both a nation and a city just seemed to forget about it, which, in retrospect, would prove to be a mistake. Do you recall anything from this event, George?
Yeah, I remember it happened. That's all I remember about it.
Were you in Florida, or where were you when it happened? Do you remember?
I lived in New York. I lived on Long Island.
Okay. Did your family freak out or anything? You're just, it's a bombing at the World Trade Center, whatever.
I don't think we talked about it at home. I think I learned about it in current events in school.
Oh. Oh, you mean you just sit in class and they brought it up?
In a current events class, yes. You talk about things that are happening currently.
Do you remember what everyone's discussion of it was? Did anyone have any hot takes?
If I did, I sure would have brought them up by now, because it would probably be funny, but I don't. I just remembered that it happened.
Okay. Well, moving on. For myself, I recall, I guess I was coming from a job, got home, saw the TV, and there was news on. Number one, a lot of stations weren't playing. I don't know if you remember that, because the transmitters at the World Trade Center obviously also got messed up when the explosion happened. But I guess CBS was the only one that was on, or one of the few that were still on.
And that broadcasting studio is located near where I work.
Oh, well, I guess that was it. And so, yeah, we just watched it on TV until the rest of the TV stations went on, and then everybody went about their business. Just really weird. Anyway.
Well, it didn't change the skyline like the next one did.
That's true. The building was still there afterwards. Moving on. The World Trade Center wasn't the only big murder news coming out of New York in 1993. George, read this headline and the first paragraph in the story brought to us by the New York Daily News.
Slaughter on the LIRR. A silent gunman unleashed a fearsome torrent of automatic gunfire on a packed rush-hour commuter train moments before it pulled into the Marillion Avenue LIRR station last night, killing 5 people, wounding as many as 17, and sending trapped passengers into a blood-curdling panic.
As usual, I won't name the man who did the shooting, as I like to avoid naming men and women whose only contribution to the world is murdering innocent people. But I will say this about the killer, who currently sits in prison and will likely be there for the rest of his life. Because he was black, all the victims were white, and he had a history of ranting about a revolution against white people, there was some concern that this would lead to a backlash against black folks. This never happened, as far as I know, although the police union, as usual, tried to use this tragedy as a means to get more cops on the train, despite crime on the trains being down.
So we're getting better, because now we're just putting the National Guard on trains instead of more cops, because that's different, right? It's different.
Before there's a mass shooting, yeah. Now it's just, they don't even need a mass shooting for it to happen. They'll just do it.
Yep.
Because of perception, they have vibes that there's crime. One of the victims who died in this mass shooting was Dennis McCarthy. His death would prompt his wife to seek a seat in Congress. Karen and McCarthy were run on a platform of gun control and served in the House of Representatives from 1997 to 2015.
Citizen was affected by tragedy. Seek seat in government runs on platform to prevent that tragedy from happening?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. It's almost like the system could work.
If only they listened to her, we wouldn't have all the mass shootings that went after the one that happened to her husband.
Well, I think also if more people who were affected by the tragedies had the resources that they could just drop things and go run for government, more of them would do that, and we could start to crowd out the people that are running to stop tragedies from happening that will never happen because they don't fucking exist because the problems are made up.
Well, George, tell us about Manhattan Murder Mystery.
Okay. This was written and directed by Woody Allen, meaning the movie would mostly contain Woody Allen talking.
And we've seen Woody's stuff for this podcast, everything you always wanted to know about sex, but we're afraid to ask, Annie Hall, and Crimes and Misdemeanors. And on my own, I've seen him in Cafe Society. I've either seen his directing or he was actually in Cafe Society, Blue Jasmine, Midnight in Paris, Whatever Works, Small Time Crooks, Bullets Over Broadway, Husbands and Wives, New York Stories, Radio Days, Hannah and Her Sisters, Broadway Danny Rose, Zelig, Stardust Memories, Manhattan, Interiors, Play It Against Sam, Bananas, Take the Money and Run, Sleeper, and Everyone Says I Love You. Yes, I've seen a lot of Woody Allen movies. Forgive me, I didn't know he was a pedo at the time.
Okay, nobody said anything, Joe. It's okay, nobody's coming after you for this. This is a safe space, Joe. You're okay. It's safe. Let it out. This is also written by Marshall Brickman,
whose work I've seen with Woody Allen. For this podcast, we've seen it in Annie Hall, and I've seen Manhattan and Sleeper, which he helped write.
So, blurbs. IMDb says, a middle-aged couple suspects foul play when their neighbor's wife suddenly drops dead. A little bit of an oversimplification, but not inaccurate.
No.
YouTube. Diane Keaton stars as Carol Lipton, a bored Manhattan housewife who becomes convinced that her next-door neighbor has committed a murder. When her skeptical husband, Larry, Woody Allen, rejects the idea, Carol turns to a flirtatious friend, Alan Alda, to help her search for clues. And as their enthusiasm for the case grows, so does their interest in each other, spurred on by jealousy and by a seductive writer, Angelica Houston, who's also excited by the mystery. Larry reluctantly joins the chase, only to learn that much more than his marriage is at stake. A comic romp bursting with wry one-liners and inspired sight gags. Copyright 1993, TriStar Pictures Incorporated, all rights reserved.
That's in the blurb?
That is in the blurb.
Well, I'm glad TriStar got a mention. You know, the studios so seldom get mentioned, so it's nice got a shout out.
Okay, so our protagonists, Carol and Larry Lipton, head home from a hockey game that Carol didn't really want to go to. Larry Lipton is played by Woody Allen, and we already talked about his ass. Carol Lipton is played by Diane Keaton. For the show, we've seen her in Annie Hall.
And I've seen her in Radio Days, Manhattan Interiors, and Looking for Mr. Goodbar, a film we discussed when Hillary was on.
Yep. And I've seen her in Father of the Bride and heard her in Look Who's Talking Now. In the elevator, they meet their next-door neighbors, Paul and Lillian House. No relation to the famed TV doctor/narcotics addict.
You don't know that.
Yeah. Well, these two couples have exchanged very few words with each other over the years. Paul House is played by Jerry Adler, and this was his sophomore acting role. He started late. Lillian House is played by Lynn Cohen,
who I've seen in Munich, and I Shot Andy Warhol.
And I've seen in Sex and the City, the movie, and The Hunger Games Catching Fire. The Houses invite the Liptons in for coffee. The conversation fleshes out the characters somewhat. Carol and Lillian go to the same gym. Larry works in publishing. Paul is renovating an old cinema and collects stamps. Carol wants to open a restaurant. The Houses never had children, and the Liptons have a college-age son.
Which will prove to be useless to the plot, and they might as well not have had them have one. But I guess they wanted to contrast it with the other couple.
Sure. The following evening, the Liptons are returning from a movie with their friends Cy and Marilyn.
Cy is played by Ron Rifkin, who we've seen on the show in LA Confidential. And I've seen in Boiler Room, Woof, Husbands and Wives, JFK, Rabbit Test, The Sunshine Boys, the 1975 version.
And I've seen in The Sum of All Fears.
And Marilyn is played by Joy Behar. And everyone knows her from The View. Or at least I do.
Yeah, I don't.
Oh, you didn't know she was on The View?
The only person I can name on The View is Whoopi Goldberg.
Okay.
When they return to their apartment building, they find it crawling with looky-loos and EMS because Lillian House has died of a heart attack. They're surprised because Lillian seemed so healthy.
Because you can look at a person and tell whether they have heart disease or not.
Yep. But Joe, she talked about her hysterectomy, like, at the drop of a hat. Why wouldn't she mention if she had a heart condition?
Yeah, maybe she would if she knew about it, but we don't always know we have heart conditions.
We sure don't, Joe, especially in 1993. Sometime later, the Liptons run into Paul out and about. He's more chipper than Carol would expect, having just lost his wife. And later, the Liptons are at dinner with Cy, Marilyn, and their recently divorced friend, Ted.
Ted is played by Alan Alda, who we know from the podcast in Crimes and Misdemeanors and What Women Want. And of course, George and I have both seen him in MASH, and I've seen him in Marriage Story, Flirting with Disaster, Everyone Says I Love You, California Suite, and The Four Seasons.
Larry has a suspicion that Ted is in love with Carol. Carol tells Ted about Paul's suspicious cheerfulness, and Ted takes that and runs with it, positing that Paul killed Lillian to run off with another woman. Larry is doubtful of this.
Imagine if your wife did come to you and started babbling about, I think our neighbor murdered somebody. What would be your reaction to it?
I've lived in Jersey City for the last 15 years.
So you figure you probably already know murderers.
No, if the sentence starts with that, I'm listening. As neighbors are wont to do when tragedy strikes their neighborhood, the Liptons bring some desserts over to Paul. Carol goes to make coffee and finds an urn with ashes hidden in a cupboard. And earlier, Paul had mentioned that Lillian had been buried, so why is there an urn with ashes? Good question, movie. Later that night, Carol sees, through the peephole in their front door, that Paul is going somewhere at 1 o'clock in the morning. What's she doing staring out there at 1 o'clock in the morning? Fuck us, that's what.
She couldn't sleep. She wanted to know what was going on.
Yeah. Larry gets increasingly irritated.
She is the ultimate. She's early Karen.
Yeah. She's proto-Karen, yeah.
Proto-Karen, very good, yeah.
Larry, except this, she's right in the end.
Except she happens to be right,
yeah.
Which is true.
Larry gets increasingly irritated with her nosiness and paranoia. Carol steals the key to Paul's apartment from the superintendent and goes snooping. She finds 2 plane tickets to Paris and a hotel reservation for him and a woman named Helen Moss. She calls Ted from Paul's apartment to tell him, but has to hang up and hide under the bed when Paul returns unexpectedly. He makes a phone call using the name Tom for some fucking reason. When he leaves, Carol does too. When she gets home, she realizes she left her glasses in Paul's apartment. Larry is furious with her antics.
Which, you can't really blame him. You're breaking into a house, you're making a phone call to our friend from the phone there? What are you doing?
Yep.
Are you trying to get caught? Number one, don't do that. But if you do it, be in and out. Don't just look for these things now. I need to find out. I don't know how I'm going to find it. But, look at this. These plane tickets, blah, blah, blah. And then he shows up again. She's like, oh, my God, I got to hide under the bed. And then she's under the bed. She hears more information. Like, Jesus, she's so lucky.
Yep. Lucky. Because this movie was scripted.
I'm talking about in the sense.
No, you have to. It's a farce
story.
It's a farcical story. Like this whole thing is a farce. But that, as long as you understand that, you're fine going through it. Carol brings Paul a chocolate mousse dessert to retrieve her glasses, but he has already found them. So Larry and Carol try to explain the awkward situation.
Yeah, he says, I dropped them and they probably kicked them under the bed. It's like, of course, he never asked, how could, from my living room, you kicked it into my bedroom?
So it was a good banking shot. The door angle was just right.
I would just assume they left it there or somehow got under my bed. Yeah, it wouldn't be like, oh, you broke in here. Because it just wouldn't occur to me either. Like, I guess that's true. I don't know how they got under there, but all right, I guess that makes sense.
Yep. Ted tracks down Helen Moss and discovers her to be a young, beautiful actress looking for work. Ted and Carol stake out Helen's apartment and follow her to Paul's theater. They sneak in and hear them talking about the profit he'll make once he sells the place. They are joined shortly by Paul's assistant Gladys Dalton.
Helen Moss is played by Melanie Norse, and Mrs. Dalton is played by Marge Redmond, who I saw in The Fortune Cookie.
At night when Paul goes out again, Carol takes a very frightened Larry with her to snoop. They use his phone's redial to get the name Waldron, break a statuette that won't be repaired by little flying gendered alien robots, and find a pair of gloves that also won't matter to the story.
No, it doesn't matter at all. And they could have just left the broken statuette on the floor, and then he would come back and, I guess it must have fallen when I left the apartment.
Yep.
I mean, things do collapse and fall down. It wouldn't be unusual.
The Liptons take their son Nick out for his birthday. When leaving, they run into Larry's top client, Marcia Fox. Larry wants to fix her up with Ted, and Carol is not a fan of the idea.
Nick Lipton is played by Zach Braff, and this is his film debut. And I've seen him in Garden State, and both George and I have seen him in Scrubs, the TV show, although I think George probably watched more episodes than I ever did.
Yeah, he was JD. He was like the central character.
He's a central character. Here's my question. Why was he there? Because poor Zach Braff, no offense to him, but he has nothing to do. He's in that one scene and he just disappears. They could have just been out to dinner themselves. They didn't need to have their son there.
He was there to laugh at the jokes that Woody Allen had written for himself to say. Because he does that. He chuckles after Woody Allen's character talks. I can't see it through anything but that lens. Let's get this new kid in here to chuckle at whatever I say so that I feel better about it.
You mean like that?
Yep. Just like that. Carol and Ted go to a wine tasting event where he drinks a bit too much and confesses to having feelings for Carol. After he leaves, she stares out the restaurant window towards the street and is shocked to see what she believes to be Lillian House riding a bus in an east-west direction on a one-way street. Larry is again unmoved by her discovery, certain that she just drank too much wine.
Yes, we should say she got home and she tells him about everything. She's very excited. And he goes like, what are you going on about? The woman's dead. You found her ashes, for God's sake. What are you doing? And she was like, if I'll just call Ted, then he'll understand.
Of course he will. So Carol takes Ted to where she saw the bus. They follow her out to its end and find a Hotel Waldron. The hotel staff has no record of any houses or Mosses staying there. Then, in an empty restaurant for some reason, Marcia is giving Larry a poker lesson. He says he's worried that Carol is having an affair with Ted. Her advice to him is take his wife's investigation more seriously. Show that he's interested in what she's interested in.
That's good advice, I think.
Sure.
Who would have thought Woody would even know that much? But what we know of his real life.
Well, this was written by another guy, too.
True. Maybe Marshall's the one who suggested it.
Yeah. So Larry goes with Carol to stake out the Hotel Waldron. He is as surprised as she is to see Lillian House walk into the place. So this is where the movie, starts. Because now it's not just Woody Allen having an excuse to say mean things to a pretty girl. They find that she's there under a different name. Duh. And they find out which room is hers. When they get there, they find her dead on the floor. They run out and call the police, but by the time the cops arrive, there's no body there.
I ain't got nobody. Nobody. Here's a very interesting thing about that. This is the first time that Woody Allen, in that moment in that picture, acknowledges there's something other than white people in Manhattan. Because at least you do get to see very briefly a black cop there, and I think a couple of other ethnics. And that's as multicultural as the film gets.
Well, pat on the back to Woody Allen. At night, the Liptons return to the hotel, and from the street see a light go on in what was Lillian's room. They use a business card given to Larry by the police to pretend to be police to get access to the room. There, they find Lillian's wedding band. When they try to leave in the elevator, it gets stuck, which triggers Larry into a claustrophobic fit. crippling mental illness played for laughs, Joe. It's great. It's beautiful.
Well, that's Woody.
Eventually, Carol opts to go out through the top, and when they open the hatch, they find Lillian's body up there. The elevator goes dark, and when they get out, they're in the basement. They go to street level just in time to see Paul stuff a body-shaped thing into his car and drive off.
Now, look, I understand this isn't trying to play the closest to reality. It's not a documentary, but still, how the hell do you get a body out of the elevator at the top, not have the two people who are in the elevator notice, and then get that body out of the building and into the back of your car? First of all, I never carried dead weight, but I would imagine that's pretty difficult to do without any sounds at the very least going, oh Jesus.
Good questions and notices, Joe. Good eye there. And good timing instincts. Since that whole thing is shot as if it's a continuous camera shot.
Yeah, it's weird. And it's hard for me to believe that Woody Allen, not necessarily the world's greatest director, but he would notice that. And I'm curious why they kept it in. There's no way he can. Well, how could they have gotten the body out?
Unless he's just playing with under the rules of farce, which is that it doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't have to make sense.
I don't think this would fall under farce, really. It's supposed to be a murder mystery, comedy murder mystery, but you still got to do some logic.
Fair. So they follow him to a junkyard and watch as Lillian's body gets dropped into a smelter. When they get home, they find that Paul is just leaving with Miss Dalton, who confirms his alibi that they were just watching a film together. Knowing that Ted and Marcia are out on a date and where they'll be, the Liptons head there, and the four start to brainstorm what Paul may be up to. Marcia even puts the pieces together, just slightly off of what will ultimately be the story, because the movie isn't over yet. If they just said what the rest of the plot was, the movie could just end. At this point, Carol starts backing off of her theory, expressing jealousy of the attention that Marcia is getting from both Larry and Ted.
I'm on a date, and my two goofy friends show up to tell me about some murder mystery thing. Like, guys, do you mind giving this not wait? If it's that important, take it to the police. Otherwise, I can talk to you in the morning.
Except that Ted has been very, very interested in this.
Ted has been, he's been going on the investigation himself.
Marcia already knows the story, kind of, and would be excited to see Larry in on it with his wife, that she told him, hey, you should do that.
Yeah, I guess everyone's very excited to... They don't mind their date being interrupted. What the hell? Let's talk about this. This is more important.
Yeah. Marcia even proposes a plan. Convince Helen Moss to read lines for an audition, tape the audition, and cut the audio together into a kind of ransom plea. Well, it so happens that Ted also owns a theater. Okay, Joe, what do you think the odds are that two random-ass New Yorkers both own theaters in New York?
In New York, not that impossible. People do own theaters here.
It just seems like a one hammer, for all the nails sort of solution with this. Somebody needs I own a theater. We could do it there. I own a theater. We could do it there.
To be fair, though, it's a little different because Alan Alda's character, Ted, he owns a theater, but it's the acting theater. It's where plays are put on. Whereas Killer, whatever his name is again, he owns a movie theater.
Okay.
So they're different theaters.
Sure. That's a good distinction. I'll take that. So they have a number of actresses come in, including Helen, to do just that. And Cy does the editing, which props to having an audio editor in a movie. Just
yes, props to having an audio editor. We do have movies about audio editors, so I can show you sometime. But here's the thing: what if Helen didn't show up for the audition? What would they have done then?
Just reschedule the audition.
Or what if she said, "I'm not
start
interested in
offering money to do it"? Like you just escalate until she accepts.
I guess.
So at Cy and Marilyn's apartment, they use 4 tape recorders to badly and haphazardly convince Paul that they have Lillian's body.
Oh, that was the technology at the time.
Yep. After the call, Gladys tries to reassure Paul by stating her support of him, and he is annoyed by it, because he's an asshole. Also after the call, outside of Cy's, Carol and Larry get as close to a divorce as the movie will let them. She walks home alone, and Larry waits an hour to make a follow-up phone call from a phone booth. Within that hour, Paul kidnaps Carol and takes her back to his theater, so when Larry calls to demand $200,000 for Lillian's body, the tables are turned and Paul demands Lillian's body be delivered to his theater or the wife gets it. Larry shows up with a mannequin, which enrages Paul, who chases him into the theater. There's a Hall of Mirrors type thingy that we've seen in at least one Bruce Lee movie and is in a movie about a train in China or some shit.
The Lady from Shanghai, which literally is what they're showing in the theater.
Wow. Subconsciously, I somehow knew that was going to tie into this.
It shouldn't be subconscious. It's literally in the picture.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've never seen the picture.
That's true.
Anyway, there's that Hall of Mirrors thingy and a movie playing, The Lady from Shanghai, apparently, all of which prolong the end of the movie until Miss Dawson shows up and shoots Paul dead to prevent him from leaving her for Helen. Larry rescues Carol, and their relationship is repaired. Ted and Marcia hit it off, and Marcia sums up the plot of the movie so that I don't have to type it up.
Mrs. House had a sister who moved to England many years ago. She changed her name when she married. Her husband died. She moved back to New York recently, a very, very rich widow, but a recluse. Mr. and Mrs. House knew they weren't in her will. They have her over to dinner. She accidentally keels over. I guessed right there. She has a reasonable resemblance to her sister, so they fake it. Pretend Lillian House died. They cremate the sister. Lillian checks into a flea bag joint, and for several weeks she pretends to be her sister, closing her accounts, liquidating her assets, accumulating big money. What she didn't realize is her husband was two-time heir with Helen Moss, this pretty model. So he decides not to cut her in and go off to, I don't know, with his mistress and keep all the dough. So he kills Lillian. He cremates her, pours molten steel all over her or something. And that's when we came along and tripped him up.
The end.
It's a very murder mystery type. I don't know how many you watch.
I don't.
But Alan pretty much captured how those things wrap up. Like, oh, let's just throw in all this exposition of what happened and what the plan was, and then the end.
Which it feels now like the movie Clue was accurately lampooning.
Oh, no question. They were accurately lampooning it.
No, it must be genius because, as we know, right, the best thing for a joke is to explain it at the end. So the best thing for a mystery is to have a character explain what really happened.
It does work in mysteries, believe it or not. It really does. You do enjoy it. I read a lot of mysteries. I watch them. It doesn't bother me in the least. Anyway, the end. George, does this still work?
Sure. This movie is so inoffensive and, I mean, it's Woody Allen, so fuck it. But still, like, it's fine. It's a lot of Woody Allen talking. He talks a lot, like a whole lot in this movie.
People like his dialogue.
Apparently.
He's how many, I think he's won more Oscars for a screenplay than just about anybody.
Look, I can't find anything in this movie other than it was boring. Until it wasn't boring, and then it was boring because it was like, oh, I didn't see it going there. You got me there, Woody Allen. Good on you. I'm glad I'm legal.
Yeah, I think it still works. It's fine. You're right. It's inoffensive. It's like hard to really find anything wrong with it. It hasn't dated too poorly. I mean, obviously the technology is much more advanced than they show then because I mean,
maybe. Okay, so counterpoint though. Maybe him doing the whole. Is this how you behave when I'm trying to forbid you? When I'm forbidding you? Is this how you behave when I'm forbidding you? I forbid you to see him. I forbid you to go looking after this guy. Is this what you do with the opposite of what I want when you're doing the thing? You
don't watch enough sitcoms. That's been done a million times.
I didn't say it worked in those either.
I forbid you, and then the woman just goes off and does what she wants, and he goes like, all right, fine. This time I'll let it go. Or he's like, this is what happens when I forbid you? It's a joke. Had she come back, it may have been more offensive to me, but since she doesn't.
True.
I mean, if anything, the real problem is that she gets kidnapped and he has to come rescue her, although he doesn't. I don't even know if you call what he does rescuing her. He just sort of finds her.
He just sort of stands there until the baddies kill each other and then...
Exactly. But in any case, yeah, I mean, that would be the only problem. Is that, he kidnaps her and number one, another impossibility. How could he get that woman out of her building? She knows the doorman. He would say something
to his theater.
To his theater. Yeah, that's quite a commute. But did he put in a cab? They drove there? I mean...
That's where I have to look at it as a farce. Because fucking really?
He's a master criminal. He just knows how to hide bodies, and he's probably murdered other wives.
That's Marcia's take on it.
This is no amateur.
So yeah, sure it works.
Alright, so this was a Patron's Choice episode, and the poll for next month's film is already up on Patreon. The choices are Cocktail from 1988, Rob Roy from 1995, and Rum Diary from 2011. Do you see a theme there? If you want to vote but are not a patron, you can fix that by becoming one at patreon.com/DTSWpod. Now, George, what's up next?
Next week, we'll be talking about Teen Wolf from 1985.
Teen Wolf. Arf, arf.
Woof.
You know they made that into a TV show.
I am aware.
You never watched an episode of it, did you?
I am aware. Wolf.
Oh, I get it. I never watched it either. I got the joke and I'm also answering.
Yeah, no. I know. I thought it was a lovely exchange between us.
Yes, I hope the listeners enjoyed it. With banter like this, how are you not members? That's what I want to know. Become patrons, for God's sake. You can hear us even more, our illustrious talk, which we're going to go into after we do this. So I guess that's it for this episode. I'm Joe Dixon. Thanks for listening.
And I'm George Romacka. Thanks for listening indeed, because if a podcast drops and there's no one around to hear it, it's just another collection of ones and zeros that doesn't matter.
I can't listen to that much Wagner, you know? I start to get the urge to conquer Poland.
You've been listening to Does This Still Work? Produced by Joe Dixon and George Romacka. The hosts can be reached via social media, email, or the contact page at dtswpod.com. Be good to yourself and others, because that still works.
You should have taken all this out. Why is this still here? Oh, we're talking about Patreon episode. I'm sorry.
So we did the thing. So now you just start talking.
Oh, this is me. Sorry.
What situation is sure to make you cry?
Would you rather have a lover who thought you were a fantastic lay, but a terrible person, or thought you were a fantastic person, but a lousy lay?
Do you name inanimate objects?
George, how many kittens do you think you could carry in your arms for a block?
What memory have you been thinking about a lot lately?
George, would you continue a date if a person showed up at the date with a friend?